happy to be joined with filmmaker Nathan Pfaff. Nathan, how are you today?
Hey, doing well. Great to be with you.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview, and I'm really excited to talk about your documentary, Film School Africa, here in just a second. But I was looking at your website earlier today, prepping for this interview, and it seems like you have a very interesting backstory in the sense that you grew up in an area called Papua New Guinea. So what drove you to that area, and how was it growing up there?
Yeah, well, my parents live and work there, so I grew up in Papua New Guinea until I finished high school, and then just came back to the States for university, where I studied film. I was always interested in film in high school growing up, and saw the impact that, movies and entertainment had even in Papua New Guinea. And so always would just make videos with my friends growing up. And when I decided to go to university, thought I'd study something that I'm interested in. So I did that, and then came out to LA about 4 years ago to kind of work my way into the film industry out here. But I'm very grateful for my upbringing overseas, and I feel like it's enabled me to just grow up with a great perspective of the world and different cultures. And it was a very rich childhood that I'm very blessed to have been able to have.
It's interesting because a lot of people that I talk with who work in the film industry, everyone has a very unique path. No one just said, I'm going to do film, grew up in Los Angeles and just grew up around Hollywood. Like everybody, it seems like, had their own unique path and journey. So what was it specifically that made you want to be a filmmaker? Was it a certain movie? What exactly was it that inspired you to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like, like a lot of people, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was kind of a big spark for me, and watching all the behind the scenes in their featurettes. I was really intrigued by kind of the process of filmmaking from those. But I really just liked the ability to kind of like share experiences. When I would make videos with my friends, I saw how you could just like show them to the family and get everybody involved, and kind of let people into experiences from your life that maybe you experienced, but they were able to grasp in a deeper way or better way. And so I really liked kind of the inclusivity, and I liked the kind of just the quality time of filmmaking with my friends. It was something for us to do. In Papua New Guinea, we could just pick up a video camera and go make a fun music video or something like that. So that's probably what started it for me.
Well, it's good to have a support system like that when, growing up and knowing that's what you want to do, to have people that support you and, go along with it. Because I'm sure, you learn some things even making those fun videos with your friends. Because I know that's similar to what I did, whenever I graduated college. I just made some funny skits and, filmed like trips that we would go on and cut videos of them. And, to have that type of upbringing and that type of support system, I imagine had to be pretty great.
Yeah. Very blessed, very grateful for that kind of background. And my family was always really supportive. So, yeah.
So when you moved back to the States to attend college, you went to Taylor University. And I watched this behind the scenes video that you made of yourself on your website, and it said that you made a documentary called The Advocate that actually won a regional Emmy in 2014. Was that your first big project that you did? And if so, what was the inspiration behind it?
That was kind of the first big documentary project that I had worked on. And it was actually for a documentary filmmaking class there at Taylor University. And I filmed it on a homeless friend of mine who was homeless in the city of Indianapolis, essentially by choice. But he felt like it was his duty to serve the homeless community there by being homeless himself. And so when we were in the class and picking subject matter, I thought he was a fascinating character and got a team involved. And so, I was able to do that. And that was a semester class. And that kind of was what started my love of documentary filmmaking, because I loved kind of the real life aspect of it, and people doing something inspiring that's, again, real life. That was a big step in my journey for documentary film specifically. And it's also a project I'm really proud of. It won a Student Emmy Award back in 2014. So
it's interesting you say that, because it takes me back, you mentioning your love of documentary filmmaking, it takes me back to when I was a kid. I used to love watching National Geographic with my grandpa. We would watch it, at night during the week, and finding out the real life aspect of things is sometimes even more fascinating than the fiction, films that are highly successful. Something I did want to point out, and it kind of segues into Film School Africa because I watched the trailer for it. Back during the 90s and even the early 2000s, I remember watching documentaries, and it almost seemed like a point and shoot type of thing. But it seems like you really added a cinematic feel to Film School Africa, and I think it shows the evolution of that genre from being, we're just going to tell a real life story, into really putting some good quality production behind it.
Oh yeah, I definitely feel like we're entering into a golden phase of documentary, and I love how even Netflix will have like documentaries if you choose like an action category on Netflix, it'll include documentaries in with fictional narrative films or something like that. And so I love how just like the access with all the new media and phones and everything, like anybody can have a bunch of footage now, collect footage and do all that kind of stuff. So funnily enough, I actually didn't watch too many documentaries growing up, but I think it was the simplicity that drew me to it, because I didn't need a big crew or a lot of lights or setup or anything. It was just kind of like, grab a camera and go sometimes. So I like the simplicity aspect of it, but I think a good documentary well told is super powerful and can change the world.
I totally agree with that. It's kind of a combination, I feel like, of cinematic quality, but also with the guerrilla style of filmmaking, where you just, like you said, you literally take a camera out and you do it.
Yeah.
So what was the inspiration behind the story of Film School Africa, and how did you go through the process of getting it made?
Yeah, so Katie Taylor, the main subject of the film, who started the film school there in the Cape Town area of South Africa, she actually came to Taylor University and gave a presentation at, I think it was right after that documentary filmmaking class. So she was able to watch The Advocate, my short documentary that I did on my homeless friend. And she came and she gave a presentation to the class and talked about how she was teaching film to youth in underprivileged areas. And two things really struck me. One was that the students were using their films as art therapy, because a lot of times they would pick up a camera having never touched one before, but they were telling real life stories from their life because that's what they knew. And a lot of them were really raw, and it was just a powerful way for them to kind of process through different events from their sometimes pretty traumatic lives and pasts that they had gone through. And so the art therapy side I found was really fascinating. But then also Katie herself was working as a casting director's assistant in LA in the film industry there. And she had worked her way up to work on some pretty big films like Spider-Man 3. And she actually gave up her quickly growing career to move to South Africa. And so here I was in film school, and I knew that a lot of my friends and I were, hoping to go into the industry or make it big or have a quickly growing career or whatever. And then here Katie was, and she was kind of giving all that up to go to South Africa and teach full time in kind of an underprivileged area there. And so a few years later, I was actually doing some film work in Africa. And so I just reached out to Katie and said like, hey, I'm going to be in Africa. I'd love to pop down to South Africa. And while I'm there, I'd love to maybe film a documentary about you and the students while I'm there. Would that be a possibility? And so she gratefully let me, and it was only the second time I had actually met her face to face. We had corresponded before, but I hadn't met her. I'd only met her once before, showing up to work with students and do this film. So very grateful that she trusted me and gave me this opportunity.
It's really inspiring to think that she gave up what's essentially a dream career to pursue this calling. So it had to be just a really strong feeling, I think, that she had to say, I can move to a different continent and I can help these people pursue their dream. Like that's inspiring stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely thought so too. And I love finding those people, those kind of like local heroes that are doing something really powerful or inspiring. And then my goal is I'd love to find those and kind of just shed a light on them to kind of show the rest of the world what they're doing, and kind of let them reach a bigger audience for others to get inspired, maybe to get involved or to do something similar as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think it would be a great way to give people an outlet to tell their story, because there were two quotes that stood out to me in the trailer. The first one was of this young man who said, "I'm a filmmaker. I just don't have the skills or the tools to do it." Like he knew what his calling was, but he just said, I know what I want to do. I just don't know how to do it. And that just, it jumped off the screen at me almost instantly. And then the other was someone else said, we're not allowed to talk about ourselves, but doing the film gives them the ability to do that. And that shows you how powerful film can be. And to me, and there's so many great art forms in the world, from, great paintings, sculptures, but to me, film is, and for those reasons is the greatest one of all.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree, obviously. But yeah, and I talk about it in the film. That's what drew Katie there too, was she heard this man say, I'm a filmmaker, but don't have the skills or tools. And that really stuck with Katie. And so she was like, well, maybe I could help, at least. But yeah.
So it's getting all these stories, because when you think of documentaries, you have to interview people and you get their story, their, take on things. Were there any stories that had an emotional impact on you?
Yeah, I think I didn't. So I kind of knew a little bit about the school going in, but what I didn't know was the students, because I obviously hadn't been there before. So I met the students when I got there. And I think watching them kind of come together and not only learn and grow in filmmaking, but kind of learn and grow helping each other, and like watching them really become a team and bond, I really loved. And so that was kind of the emotional aspect that I wasn't anticipating, that was a big part of the film, actually. So I would say that was kind of the part that I enjoyed watching the most, because I would often go on set with them to film kind of the behind the scenes that became the documentary, and just watching them interact with each other. And then I kind of just became the crazy uncle who was always there, always in the background kind of filming. So it was a fun dynamic.
I'm sure they got used to you at a certain point. It's just like, it was almost like, oh yeah, the camera's there. No huge deal.
Yeah.
It just became an everyday
a while,
thing.
But they eventually did get to that point. But it wasn't, at first they were kind of like, why is he filming us? Like I bet they were wondering if I was going to report it back to Katie and it would affect their grade or something like that. But they did warm up to me, and we all became close friends. So it was a fun process.
That's great. I've got to ask, because it sounds like this project was just a huge undertaking, because you handled a lot of the filming, the editing. How long did it take you to shoot all the footage? And if you don't know the exact number, that's perfectly fine. But do you have an estimated number of how many hours of footage that you shot?
I once upon a time did, and I calculated it out, but I forget that number at the moment. But it was definitely a couple of terabytes worth of footage. I filmed for about 3 months, which was one of the school's semesters. And so I did filming for 3 months. And then towards the end of it, Katie actually was like, hey, I have all these old archival DV tapes from the early days, from back in 2008 when they did the very first class. And so I was like, what? These are gold. And so I spent the last week that I was there in South Africa just digitizing old DV tapes so I could get all that archival footage as well, which ended up being a huge blessing and was, a good portion of the first chunk of the film. And so, yeah, I filmed for about 3 months, and then I came back to the States and I edited it for about a year. I actually just worked on my laptop sitting on my couch in my apartment, and just edited it for about a year after that, a little over. So, yeah.
And it's crazy because, back in the day, I guess you would say, you had to go to a studio or an office, go into an edit bay and edit there. But now the advancements of filmmaking, we're at the point where you can put together a full film or a full documentary on a laptop. And it's insane. It's absolutely insane. It's funny you mentioned DV tapes. I don't think I've heard that term in several years. My first projects I ever filmed were on mini DV tapes, and I still think I have a giant stack of them at my parents' house.
Yeah.
So one day I should digitize all those. How many hours do you think you spent editing this? Because you said it took you a year to edit. That's got to be an insane amount of hours.
I believe it was over 800 hours of editing.
Wow.
I think I lost track after 800 hours, because it was just me, and I enjoyed doing it. So I enjoyed, combing through every single piece of footage and really kind of tweaking everything. So, yeah, I think it was over 800 hours worth of editing.
What just out of curiosity, what software did you use to edit?
Yeah, I used Premiere Pro.
Oh, perfect.
And very grateful, definitely this generation person, very grateful for all the new technology to be able to do it on my laptop in Premiere by myself, before you would have needed a studio and crazy equipment. So, and funnily enough, you mentioned DV tapes. I actually never filmed on DV tapes myself. I just came into filmmaking right as they were coming out with hard drive camcorders. Mm-hmm. And so my first little camcorder was hard drive based and digital files. So I never actually had the pleasure or the hassle, depending on how you look at it, of working with tapes.
Real-time capturing was a fun time back in the day. I had my old FireWire port that I would plug into my camera. The other end would go into my computer, and if you had a 3-hour tape, it would take you 3 hours to import it or digitize it, which was fun. It makes you appreciate the technology now, where you can just pop an SD card in the computer and just take X amount of time to import onto your computer. But
oh yeah, very grateful for current technology.
Absolutely. So, as we start to wrap up here, I do want to ask, what's next for you as far as your film career? Do you have any other projects in the works?
I got a couple ideas in the works, nothing too solidified. I think I've thought about doing one on my parents and their work in Papua New Guinea. But we'll see. I'd love to, again, keep just telling stories of local heroes and kind of shedding a light on what they're doing to kind of have them reach bigger audiences, and then they can use my films as marketing purposes or promotional materials or things like that. So I love the finding character-based, personal-driven documentaries.
Yeah, those definitely hit home on a different level than traditional film does, for sure. Last question I want to ask you before I let you go. Do you have any advice you could give to an aspiring filmmaker?
Any advice I would give? Someone gave this advice to me, and I very literally took it to heart in making this film. But he kind of mentioned that if you want to do something, especially in the film industry, you should just kind of keep doing that thing and get known for doing that thing or being in that position. Because if you try to start somewhere else and slowly work your way up the ladder, it's so easy to get stuck and get caught doing something that you don't want to be doing. And most people don't actually move up to where they want to be anyway. But so like in filmmaking, if you want to be a director, he just encouraged me, keep directing, so that when people know you, they know you as a director and they'll be willing to give you a shot someday. Whereas if you try out to be assistant somewhere, then they'll only know you as a really good assistant and not as a really good director. And so I knew that I wanted to make documentaries, and I was like, I should, have a feature film under my belt. So I just went out and shot a feature film because I wanted to be known as a documentary filmmaker and not just an assistant somewhere or editor somewhere. So that's kind of the advice I would give other people, is just whatever you want to do, keep always doing something in that track so that people know and remember you as that thing.
That's great advice. And do you have any website or social media you'd like to plug so the listeners can follow you?
Yeah, well, for the film, it's filmschoolafrica.org. You can go to that website, and that tells you a lot about the school. And there's also a page for the documentary there. And then we have Facebook and Instagram accounts at Film School Africa and FSA Doc for Film School Africa Documentary on Facebook and Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. It was great.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure being with you.